Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I am in venture capital, sort of with a twist. For the last over 20, nearly 25 years, I have been focused my investing on founders of color in a direct attempt to address the fact that the inequity really that exists with the just this year has a focus not only on founders of color, but women as well. So that's my background. I'm resident of Boston for over 35 years, and I'm a member of the SBN Mass Board of Directors as well. What I want to share with you today, I want to sort of ground us really as I think about the topic of surviving and thriving in our economic world today. That's a scary proposition. And so how do you do that? You know, survive and thrive also in the context of pursuing racial equity. And so I don't have a magic wand for that, but I think that I'd like to give us some grounding as to where we should start with that question, because many of you from all around the country, I don't have a specific prescription. Others will give you that. I want to give you a mantra and some principles. And that mantra is that we are all in this together. We're all in this together. And I have three guiding principles that I want to share with you. The first is that in surviving and thriving and pursuing racial equity, we need to share our privilege. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm going to give you a personal example through a story of how sharing of privilege affected me. When I was in my early part of my senior year in high school, I lived in a community, I grew up in a community that was all Black, middle class, and went to schools that were all Black. My teachers were all Black. My total life experience had been about being a person of Blackness. And so that fall of my senior year, when I was invited to, or requested to go to the principal's office, it was a little scary experience because, you know, I was a good student, I was a good athlete. I wondered why she was calling me to the office. And so I got there, and the principal introduced me to this young, but maybe late 20s, white man who had appeared in her office door. She made the introduction and left. Then the young man there, whose name was Pete Hart, introduced himself to me and said, "I'm a volunteer for Harvard recruiting." Today, I broke away from my group that usually goes to the other high schools and decided on my own I was going to go to the Black high school. And so I just showed up today and asked the principal if I could see the top 3 students in the school, and I was number 3. We didn't talk very long, but Pete said to me, "We're going to have a citywide reception for Harvard, and I'd like for you and your parents to attend. I don't live here, but I'll come back for the reception." So my father and I went about a month later, and we were the only Black folks there. Pete Hart did come back. He made sure we felt comfortable in that room. And at the end of that, he said, "I want you to apply to Harvard." Now, there was some good reason for it. I was tracking well to be a National Merit Scholar. I was on my way to receiving a full athletic scholarship in football to Ohio State. But I had no thought about applying to an Ivy League school. No one in my high school had ever gone to an Ivy League school. And so I applied. I was accepted. Now, the moral of the story is that I don't know if Pete Hart ever did that again, crossed the proverbial tracks to make that kind of invitation or to share that privilege, his privilege, with me. But he changed my life. he changed my life. So that was him sharing privilege. My teachers, my parents had prepared me to receive an opportunity. He gave it to me. So there are all kinds of ways in doing little things that you might not even seem matter very much, that by sharing even a little of the privilege you have, you can make a difference. The other principle I'm going to share with you is ask who needs help. I live in a community that's fairly diverse. I go to a dry cleaner for the last 30 years. The woman that attends that is a Latina woman. She's been there 30 years. I've watched her grow her children and seen her grandchildren arrive. When COVID kicked up, things got bad. I didn't have any clothes to clean that particular day, but remembering what Pete Hart did for me, I went into the dry cleaners, and I said, "Anna, how you doing?" And of course, she said, I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. And I didn't believe her. So I put a $100 bill on the counter and said, "This is for you." And she said, "Of course, I can't accept that. I can't accept that." I said, "You must accept that." And she cried. Ask who needs help. The third principle I would share with you is if you need help, ask for it. Anne wasn't prepared to ask for it. She needed that help. And there'll be people out there who are willing to help you if you let them know you really need it. So if we can follow those principles, share our privilege, ask who needs help, and ask for help, I think we would be well on our way to really following the mantra which I suggested, which is that we are all in this together. So that's my message to you. And I think it's my job to introduce our next guest speaker, who is an amazing person, Segun Idowu. And if I mispronounced your last name, forgive me, Segun. But Segun, you have probably read about in his bio. And if you have, you know that he is a graduate of Morehouse, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Morehouse. You know that he's a son of Boston, where he was raised here. He's been an active member in our community, both politically. If you dug a little deeper and went and Googled him, you'd find that the Boston Globe has written much about him recently. And one of the headlines for an article about him read, "I want to see the next Black Wall Street in Boston." And you'll follow that in the article where you'll see much in the way of praise for his leadership at the young age of only 31. But what you won't see, but what I want to add is that Segun is also a great guy. He is a great guy. So with that introduction, Segun, welcome to this conference.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very, very much, Ed. I mean, it's I remember having the opportunity to meet you last year, but hearing of your legend before meeting you, and so it is actually pretty humbling to even be introduced by you. It should be happening the other way around, but I'll get on Lori and Derek about that. But thank you very much, and I appreciated your comments prior to and ensuring that I myself will be focusing on why it's important for us to center racial equity, and so your comments are spot on. Before getting into that, I also want to thank Derek and the whole team at Amoeba, and of course, have to shout out and praise Lori Hamill and the Sustainable Business Network. They have been our eternal and enduring partners, particularly during this time. As I said earlier, I'm grateful for the opportunity to address all of you today. This is my second time. Last year, Lori and SBN graciously invited a somewhat new executive director. I just joined in November of 2018 of this fledgling organization to offer comments on our then struggle to push the city of Boston to reinvest in businesses of color, the same wealth that they are continuing to pour back into our communities, even at this moment. At that time, we had exposed that in 2018, in a city where Black people make up close to a quarter of the population and all people of color make up more than half of the population here, less than 1% of Boston's discretionary spending went to minority businesses. And for the numbers people, that's $4 million out of $664 million. And so our approach to helping to identify the problem and then meet with Mayor Walsh and his cabinet members to offer and work on solutions was highlighted and shared at the conference last year. At the same time last year, our business members themselves were on a growth trajectory in their respective industries. They were on their way to being able to scale up, to hire more people from our communities, to help close the racial wealth gap and keep our families sustained. But today, we're meeting at a moment when all the news reports that more than half of Black-owned businesses across the nation and more than 20% of Black and brown businesses here in Massachusetts have closed their doors for good. We're meeting at a time when business owners in my community and in my state are being forced to decide whether they must remain closed for the health of their community or open their doors for the well-being of their families. We're also meeting at an inflection point in our history, when the unhealed wounds of our nation are burst open and we're forced to reckon with the guilt of our past injustices and present-day atrocities. We're meeting at a time when Black and brown businesses are quite literally facing extinction. This is why, though the tenor of my comments today were supposed to focus on how local entrepreneurs of all backgrounds can thrive in this moment, I have to acknowledge that not all business owners or entrepreneurs are guaranteed to survive through this pandemic because of their background. Every day, we are bearing witness to the fact that, though this be a critical time for all of us, COVID-19 not only threatens Black and brown lives at disproportionate rates, but our livelihood as well. This pandemic has not affected us all equally. What feels like 7 years ago, in March of this year, we surveyed our more than 300 business members to have an understanding of how this pandemic was affecting their businesses. It must be noted at that time that the nation or our state were taking this virus seriously. We had not shut our doors at that time. We were still out and about. We were treating this like the problem of other nations. In fact, we had heard from the top on down that this was going to pass by us like the common flu. But even at that time, over 90% of our businesses were reporting that they had been somewhat to severely impacted by the virus. Over 60% reported experiencing supply chain disruptions. Over 60% said that they only had cash reserves to last up to 90 days, if at all. And almost half, at that time in March, early March, almost half of our business members indicated that they would need to lay off staff if they wanted to stay afloat. The pandemic has not affected us all equally. And so while we know that all small businesses and all entrepreneurs are facing immense obstacles at this moment, there's a segment of this population that was already facing these hurdles, for which the pandemic has only exacerbated. A rising tide does not lift all boats. In some cases, it subsumes them. That's why we have to be intentional in all of our efforts to center racial equity and eliminate historic harms. While the current federal administration has launched an assault on this notion of racial equity and addressing systemic racism, their own business policies have laid bare the need to do the opposite. When the CARES Act was passed earlier this year, our federal government created what was known as the Paycheck Protection Program. This program is meant to buoy our small businesses across the nation by providing emergency relief capital to help businesses maintain their payroll and pay off other operating expenses. However, because they took a race-neutral approach, because they did not center equity, because they assumed that all businesses were made equal, a majority of Black and brown businesses did not gain access to this program. In fact, the Center for Responsible Lending found that 95% of Black businesses and 91% of all minority businesses did not receive access to PPP loans in the first round. This is because Congress and the White House did not take into account that in order to apply for the PPP loan, you had to have a relationship with a commercial lender. Well, Black businesses in particular did not have this relationship because of that ideology, that insidious institutional practice known as systemic racism. When it comes to loans, Black people in particular are either consistently denied or consistently preyed upon. And so these relationships were either non-existent or tainted due to a history of repeated injuries. If it were not for organizations like Amoeba and SBN and others doing their duty to center equity in their advocacy work, we would have seen this same shameful statistic repeated in the second round of PPP. Here in Massachusetts as well, the story was the same. If it had not been for groups like List Boston and the Mass Association of CDCs and the Foundation for Business Equity, Commonwealth Kitchen, Amplify Latinx, BECMA, ICIC, so many others, dozens and dozens of community partners, lenders, and technical assistance providers, then the over 500 Black and brown businesses that we worked with would never have gained access to the over $5 million in PPP loans they now have to sustain their businesses and each other. This came from centering equity. Still further improving why our collective work to save small businesses have to continue to center equity, I take you to a report that came out in April of this year from the Brookings Institution. It found that after the Great Recession between 2007 and 2012, while total white businesses lost 1.6 million jobs, minority businesses helped to add 1.8 million jobs to the national economy. So it's clear from this alone that when we invest in Black and other minority businesses, not only do these communities thrive, but the entire economy is saved. But we have to understand that our community will not be able to play the part of savior of this economic crisis if we are not intentional. Our gains in the second decade of this century were made entirely possible because of the industries that we inhabit. We are overrepresented in the sectors of retail, restaurants, hair care, personal care. But according to new studies, we know that these same industries will face the highest failure rates and will remain unstable for decades to come, precisely because these industries require in-person human contact. Well, just as banks were too big to fail back in 2007, so too are our small businesses. Pre-COVID, more than 909,000 minority-owned firms employed 7.2 million people and added $1.4 trillion to the national economy. In Massachusetts alone, 13,000 minority-owned businesses employ 125,000 people and contribute billions of dollars to the state economy, of which we are now trying to fill in the holes. What this recent history and these figures tell us is that beyond grants and loans and lines of credit, the way to help sustain our businesses and ensure the growth of our economy is through commerce. After eliminating these barriers to capital and investment that existed prior to and during COVID, and who founders and leaders like Ed are helping to take us in a new direction, invest in founders of color, every business, corporation, every government entity must strive hard to do business with our people. It is this marketplace exchange of goods and services and talent and goodwill that's going to put our businesses, all of our businesses, in a position to grow and scale when this pandemic subsides. To do this, we must ensure that every policy, every idea, every practice, every program, every institution is framed and viewed and built and carried out through the lens of racial equity from this day and every day forward. We must trust the leadership of Black and brown people. We must follow the leadership of Black and brown people. We must invest in the leadership of Black and brown people. In the final analysis, we must come to see that the development of some communities cannot coexist with the underdevelopment of others. And so now is our opportunity to make it so. By investing in groups like BECMA, investing and following groups like the Black Business Network, investing and believing in groups like SBN and like Amoeba. I'll end here by leaving with a proverb that guides my work and my thinking every single day. It's a Chinese proverb that says that if you want 1 year of prosperity, grow grain. If you want 10 years of prosperity, grow trees. But if you want 100 years of prosperity, grow people. And so I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you here, with Derek, with Lori, Nicola, Ed, and so many others to help ensure that as we're working to save our small businesses, we are working to center racial equity to ensure the prosperity of our communities, our Commonwealth, and our country for generations to come. I appreciate this opportunity to share with all of you, but I'm mostly looking forward to listening to what each and every one of you has to contribute today. Thank you.
Thank you, Segun. That was very inspirational, and I look forward to working with you in the very near future. That was very, very powerful, and I want to thank you. So Peter, as our facilitator, we're going to break up into small groups again, and we're going to talk about what struck us. Peter, do you have a question that you would want to break us up into groups with?
I would just ask people to say, where do you see something working? Because it's you're here to organize the gifts and the success of what is working and publicize that, in addition to all the suffering around us. So that's just my thought.
Thank you. And Darren, I think we're ready to break up.